Hey folks, Steve here with another Precious Glory 1 video for you today. We're going to actually, hopefully all in one video, because I'm not going to show everything on camera all the time. In one video, we're going to do the main campaign of the Rossbach battle. So the distinction between the two things here, the previous videos we did was functionally just the battle. So the maneuvering had already occurred. Frederick had his army in a very good position, and he kind of played through the end result of that, which was sort of a surprise on the Austrians, and it went downhill for them from there, both historically and in our playthrough, which is kind of expected. Now the main scenario, I don't want to call it campaign, but the broader scenario actually introduces some interesting puzzles for the players to consider in the system, because what it is it's the setup is really more free form. Each player is given a zone of the map to set up in. The French and Austrians have to set up basically along through here. There's a red dotted line marked out, and the Prussians can set up over here. So they could set up very far up. They could set up farther back. And so the setup that you see here is not prescribed in the scenario book. It's just what I wanted to do, not having a really good idea of what's a good setup for this. Um, Now there's actually an article on Board Game Geek that the designer has uploaded that kind of talks through like all the different kind of ways that this can shake out, because there's nothing necessarily making it happen the way that the battle itself did, where there was sort of this showdown over here that was significant. There's no real need to do that, as long as you're venturing at your victory conditions. But because we're playing the sort of full scenario, we are going to be using the army activation rules. So the way that works is, as the very first part of a player turn, until until basically both armies activate, but or I guess I should say until your army activates as a player, you're going to do the army activation checks, and then once you activate, you don't need to do it anymore. So in the battle, both sides were considered to have already been activated, so there's no need to do this. So it's a new sort of part of the sequence of play that we've not done yet. The way it basically works is you pay a morale penalty to try to activate, the costs of which are defined per scenario. You roll a die, and then depending on the value of your overall commander, so for the Prussians, that would be Frederick. For the French and Austrians, they don't have any, so I believe it's just the zero. You add a modifier, and if you reach a certain threshold, they get to activate, which means they can freely, move around the map, do all those kind of fun things. If you fail to activate, then really you're not able to do a whole lot. And in fact, there are a couple of exceptions around having detachments on the board. This scenario doesn't have detachments, I don't believe, but those could be used to do some very basic like scouting and have an increased chance of activating, which we will not see in this scenario here. And so ordinarily, that's just sort of how it works. And what that will tend to be in most scenarios is Frederick will be very likely to activate his army early, and then basically try to figure out how to make use of the broad operational territory around the map, and get into whatever position makes the most sense for them to do. And they'll have a head start because he's a good leader. In other scenarios besides this one, the Austrians or French or what have you may have better leaders that enable them to activate more easily. Here, their hands are a bit tied, but there's a special mechanic for this scenario that offsets that weakness a little bit. So basically, you want to be activating, and you want to be succeeding and getting a move on. The non-Frederick side, whoever that may be, has to be careful. So the idea would be, yes, you definitely want to activate, and what you could end up doing is basically interrupting Frederick's maneuvers while he's trying to do something. Maybe he's exposed, and if you can activate and disrupt him, you could almost think of that like, if you're playing in a point to point or hex game, you're rolling to intercept or something. That would almost be like what's happening. Is the enemy army, seeing what's going on, they manage to activate, and they can disrupt what's happening. But again, you pay a morale penalty for trying to activate, and if you try to activate too much, you could find yourself in a really bad morale situation later. Be harder to succeed in avoiding demoralization or something along those lines. So it's sort of this. I think the mechanic's interesting because it adds some tension to, hey, can you really put the enemy in a bad position? But you're kind of pushing your luck with the dice, and you could get caught out in a bad way. Um, and then, it's how you get some of these situations where and how the battle took place historically is because of these sort of, again, the maneuvering, the lack of either the presence of or lack of good reconnaissance and scouting with cavalry detachments and all that kind of stuff to see what's going on. And in this case, in this scenario, we're actually in a weird position. So in this scenario, there's a special role that's going to be referred to in the scenario roles as historical time pressure. And basically, for the French and Austrian player, while they may not be able to activate easily because of their leader absence, what they can do is roll the die. And if on a roll of 1, they may voluntarily activate at no cost. If voluntarily activated, they're going to get a big morale boost. But they have to take their units and leave their positions and move toward a Prussian unit or the victory towns on the map, which happen to be over here. It might be hard to see. They're actually marked with a star, and then down here where the historical battle really centered. So there's what this is representing is sort of this situation where the Austrians may not have been in great shape. The French Austrians may not have been in great shape, but they sort of rallied out of their positions to go move forward, and by doing so, kind of gets guys off their butts, feeling a little bit better about the morale situation. If they can get all units, they need to get east of the entrenchments, which is that dark brown line you see there. That's a set of entrenchments. They need to get east of that within so many turns, and then adjacent to either a Prussian unit or the town, one of the towns, within 6 turns. There's some errata covering some of this stuff. And then basically, that timer is a factor. But for both armies, there is a passiveness penalty. So at the end of every Prussian movement phase and every French Empire movement phase, that the army does not advance, roll 1 die. Armies that are not activated must still make a passiveness roll, so that's important. And on a roll of 6, we're going to subtract 2 from the Prussian morale when the Prussians are going, and then there's a slightly different cadence, but the French Empire side will lose morale as well. There's a limit to how far it can go down for the French Empire, but basically what this does is it forces the players into making a decision about who's going to be on offense or defense, and it's not necessarily set if the players don't want it to be. So what could happen is if those passive die rolls hurt the Prussians very early, then the Prussians are going to be incentivized to try to get on the move and try to attack the Austrians and the French, despite them being over here maybe. Conversely, that whole system is going to incentivize the Austrians to try to make an advance either towards that set of town hexes or that set of town hexes, or just fight the Prussians as best they can. So it's going to get them to leave those entrenchments and actually head out like they historically did, and sort of be trying to maneuver out, and the Prussians have to kind of decide where are they going to meet the Austrians at to fight, and figure out where's the best situation that is even going to happen. So you could have the Prussians attack the Austrians, and the Austrians stay here because their die rolls are doing pretty well. They're avoiding major morale loss. And if the Prussians are getting the worst of it, then they could just sit back here. The con is if they start getting routed, they're really close to a map edge, and they could lose units very easily. So there's a little bit of tension here. And the article that the game designer put on Board Game Geek some years ago actually kind of talks through well, you could do this, and here are the advantages and disadvantages, and you could do that. This could be how the way things shake out. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do. What I think I when I what I want to do is kind of figure out from a victory point perspective, like who's advantaged from just sitting tight, and maybe that's going to influence my decision. The dice are actually going to probably push me in one direction or the other for each side. And the tough thing for the Prussians up here is that I put them in on top of the Janus Hill, in a position I think maybe close to historical where they can kind of pivot if they have to. So these are mostly the infantry up here with the cavalry wing situated here. If the Austrians decide to all kind of head down this way, then I swing the cavalry around and maybe we get something like a historical battle. If they go north, then there's going to be some terrain slowing them down. We can kind of decide how we want to frame up the position. And then alternatively, what could happen is the Austrians go on offense and try to come through the center. That they're going to have some terrain block. So it is kind of an interesting, I think, setup of okay, what do I think I need to do? The Austrians and the French will get a bonus set of 10 victory points if they can get into these victory towns. So that's another incentive for them to leave their defensive position here. And I think there's definitely a reason to try to make it happen. To keep it from being too much like the last battle, I may send them north just to see how that differs in the gameplay and what the situation is. It'd be very ahistorical, but might make for an interesting situation. So the first thing that we're going to do is, because it does start with a French turn, is we're going to see if the French have an army activation. That would be the very first thing that we want to do. Try to see if there's any other gotcha special rules we should keep in mind. If nothing really changes and neither side becomes demoralized, then all things the same, it would be a French and Empire victory. So it does mean the Prussians kind of have to figure out what they want to do there. So if they can activate, then they may be able to figure something out. I don't know. Let's get some die rolling, and I think I might need to clean my camera because I don't think the video is coming through quite as good as it usually does. Okay, so we're gonna try to activate as the Prussians. It's gonna be really easy. What you do is you roll a die and you add your overall commander's initiative rating, which for Frederick is a 5. So there's almost no way to fail this. Yeah, we're good to go. So the Prussians activate. They don't need to try to activate anymore. Now the question is, do they do anything yet? Because they could wait to see if the morale starts ticking down for the Austrians and forcing them to come to the Prussians, which I think is better. I think the outnumbered Prussians trying to assault Austrian defenses with that artillery hanging out is probably not a good idea. So I think for now, everyone's going to get an extra hour of breakfast, and the Prussians are not going to move yet. Now we have to do the passiveness check. So we're going to roll and hope we don't get a 6. I rolled a 6. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put, let's see, we had 1 morale for the activation, and then we're going to put 2 more morale markers there. So it's almost like they're lost units. So we spent a morale to activate, and then we are losing 2 more for passiveness. I mean, even if we had moved, we still would have gotten it, but that's sort of the timer that's starting to tick down. So that's not good for the Prussians. And that's it for their player turn. There's just not anything else for them to do. So that kind of sucks. I think some of the soldiers are saying, why aren't we attacking? Let's go get them. I don't know. They're feeling bummed for waiting around, eating another sausage, guys. Now for the French, so here the French Austrians, whatever, the coalition, I'm just going to use the term coalition since that's the term the game uses. On the coalition side, they don't have an overall commander, which means on a straight up die roll, they can't succeed in activating on their own. They're either going to activate because the Prussians get into their space, or they get the special die roll to activate on if they roll a 1. So basically, in the absence of the ability to do a normal activation or anything else, which would require an overall commander, and with the Prussians not nearby, our only real option right now for the coalition forces to roll our single die and hope to get a 1, though it's a bit early for that. And I rolled a 1. So let's see. We're gonna have to make a decision on a optional rule here in a second. So on a roll of 1, they may voluntarily activate at no cost. If voluntarily activated, the French, okay, I'll just say coalition player, can immediately claim up to a +8 morale bonus if all units leave their positions and move each turn until any 3-line infantry are either adjacent to a Prussian unit or close to one of the victory towns. So we gotta move pretty quickly. If they miss certain deadlines in terms of moving forward, then they'll lose the morale bonus and they'll lose even more. Now, there's an optional rule in the living rules that are around a limit to how high morale can go for the Austrians, and they note that it's possible that giving them too much morale ends up with steroid-induced coalition victories. I'm cautious of that. So I'm going to go ahead and choose to implement that rule. So what's going to happen is we're going to claim the morale bonus now, and the coalition morale is going to jump up to 14 rather than 18, which is the normal maximum. They're going to go up to 14. So they have a boost of morale and they activate. So there's a little bit of a lawn here. But we need to go get them, right? And the time limits with which we need to go get them are basically 5 and 6 turns ahead. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I'm just putting markers on the turn track for us to remember the yeah. If they activate at 8:30, place markers in the. Oh, I think I'm supposed to move these up a little bit more. Ah, yeah, I gotta move them this way. Okay, so there is a time limit now in effect that the Austrians are going to have to go get moving. Okay, we got to get moving is what the rules are all working out to be. So the coalition player is saying they will voluntarily activate in advance to claim the bonus. Had we not taken it and had we not decided to move, we would have had to wait for another roll of a 1 later. And I think the bizarre luck of the Prussians losing 2 morale on the first turn and the Austrians, the coalition, able to get a boost and activate this quickly is a good thing for them, I think. Because the more time that the Austrians have, the more they can work with to try to get into a position to defeat the Prussians in detail, I think. So the other thing is the Austrians are not going to suffer a passiveness penalty because we're going to advance towards the enemy or those towns. So now it's going to be a penalty to the Prussians. And what the net effect of the rule is if I, as the Prussians, just try to avoid the Austrian army too much, I could stand to lose more morale from just running away. And so it's going to force the Prussians to like not mess around too much. The Prussians will have to pick, however the Austrians advance, they have to be attacked somewhere, right? That is going to have to happen before too long, or the Prussians are going to suffer too much morale loss. So I'm going to roll for the effectiveness. The infantry actually succeed, and so do the cavalry. And then we've got our special group, which also is efficient. So all of the Austrian forces, the coalition forces, they are all efficient and get their full movement. And now I'm going to get movement underway, and I'm going to have to think about where I'm going to send them. What's my strategy here? What do I want to do? And also keeping in mind that um, we're probably not going to be surprised by the Prussians, and I can probably avoid putting these guys into column movement potentially. Um, so I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the coalition movement, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, here we are after the Austrian movement, coalition movement. You can see we are moving eastward. We're gonna have already met some of the deadlines for actually getting a move on. Um, so I think the other concern will be, are they going to get to one of the victory cities fast enough? And I am realizing that by going north, the terrain is going to be its own partial challenge, and could slow us down and keep us from getting all the way up to the towns that we need to get to. But I think the Prussians are going to feel some pause here because we're able to move diligently, and start heading in their direction. They can try to say, okay, we'll face the Austrians in the field somehow. We'll find a way to defeat them, and probably actually, I think there was a question about in column movement that I was wondering, like, do I just put these guys in a column movement? I don't think that any of the Prussians could actually catch them if they did. And so I think what I'm probably going to do is actually go back. I'm going to like edit what I just did and put some of those guys in a column movement so that they can get uh, some additional distance that I think they would just need to. Um, so yeah, let me see if I can fix some of that. I do think I haven't really used in column movement myself yet, and this seems like a good opportune time to make use of the advantage. There are markers for this. I think I'm gonna not bother with them because I don't think. Well, we'll see how far these units get, and then that'll determine what we get. Okay, so making the adjustment, and you see I flipped the leader markers over to their in column side. All those units have moved an extra 4 movement points, ignoring terrain costs to get where they needed to go. There's probably in some spots I could have moved an extra hex because I did pay some movement costs before this adjustment, but I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I think they're in a good position. You can kind of see we're very clearly kind of making an advance in a certain direction. Um, and what we're going to have to decide is, do we want to funnel things into this, with the oversight of the hill, or do we send some of our guys up to take the hill? And I may do that with some of these forces, just to have something, cross our own T here and try to drive down the hill, or at least make it so that those units get chewed up. I think the key thing is, if we overwhelm the Prussians with numbers from multiple angles, their inherent morale advantage will be offset. And so I think this is a good position. I think they've moved, they're moving swiftly, um, and they're going to be able to keep moving. I will probably not keep them in column movement because we don't want a historical smashing by this cavalry wing here. That would just be very bad. So I think we could accept any other issues as long as we keep advancing. And if we're lucky, the Prussians will suffer some more morale losses. So now I've got the turn marker on to turn 2. It's back to the Prussians. Prussians are going to roll for their efficiency. I'm not too worried about them succeeding in that. Yeah, they succeeded in their efficiency rolls. So now it's just a question of what can the Prussians do for movement that would make a difference here. Because there's, as opposed to the last scenario where, gosh, we only played for 4 turns and it got awfully bloody and nasty. The Prussians are really working at a disadvantage on time right now. And if the coalition can get to this town, they can't just abandon this town. They're going to get a lot of victory points, enough to keep the Prussians from winning. So the Prussians are going to have to stand and fight somehow, or decide to do something um, in their advantage. I just don't know what that's going to be yet. But we'll do some movement and we'll see if they can change their position any to help their cause. Okay, here we are after the Prussian move. You can see I'm started to pull up this way, so at least we can try to meet the Austrians quickly. They managed to avoid losing any morale. So the idea, the hope being, we can try to get something in place to maybe start to push the Austrians back. One thing we could maybe hope for is to hit the Austrians, the Prussian, or the Austrian and the French coalition forces, and cause kind of a cascading rout. That would be maybe one thing we could try to do as the Prussians, but no guarantee. So here we would be going into the Austrian coalition turn, and we're going to want to deploy from column, I guess, is the first thing. So all these guys would leave column, and then we would have our own movement. Now, there are some units of the forces that could, if they so chose, could actually advance into combat. So these guys here could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they would probably get torn up a bit by Seydlitz's pretty potent cavalry. So I think what we're going to use some discretion here, and we're going to advance, but we're going to advance cautiously, and see if we can't meet these guys on much better terms. So I'm going to go do that movement, and again, we're going to get closer and closer to all the clashes. But once the guns start firing, stuff is going to get bloody, and units are going to pile up pretty quickly. Okay, so the Prussians have moved forward, kind of set up a firing line to see if they can't win by letting the Austrians kind of get chewed up in here. The Austrians still have a pressure to move forward, and really the Austrians were lucky they've been able to activate so well. But I think that's where it's going to come to an end. So we're getting to the coalition turn of turn 3, and the question will be, can they make use of, can they try to get over here and push the Prussian wing back? What maybe I should have done is set up a little bit different. There's kind of this exposed flank, and I wonder if maybe instead what I should have done is have somebody come over here like that. That would probably help the line a little bit. So it's going to be kind of a tough situation. The river is going to help maybe the Prussians a little bit. They could fire over the river, maybe. That could be its own problem. But just, and then being near the town's probably a foolish idea. I don't know if maybe this was a good Prussian move. This might actually be a really bad idea on my part. Because you suffer penalties. I mean, I guess you suffer penalties attacking into and out of a town. So there would still be some issues for any coalition force that try to cross the river at that artillery spot. But we'll have to see. So that's it for the Prussian movement. We're going to go to the coalition. We could very well see some combat this turn, which would dissolve some of the concerns about passiveness and activation. But gosh, that's a huge number of turns to be fighting. It's going to get rough, and I think right now the advantage may be with the Austrians because they can outlast the Prussians a little bit, given they've not been caught in a really nasty surprise situation. Okay, here we are after the coalition move. You can see we've sent out the Austrian hussars down here out to try to flank the Prussian position. We're having a steady crossing of the river and getting into a position. and we've moved these guys into the town, which could potentially receive some fire from Prussian artillery, but given the terrain penalties, I don't think they're going to hit anything. But defensive bombardment will happen. And then up north, you can see everything's kind of moving along, but cautiously, because what we don't want to, like, this could be really bad if they all retreat into each other. And I'm willing to take that risk for the moment because I'm banking on these guys coming through, potentially winning a victory against these hussars and getting some momentum into here, which is going to set the Prussians in a really bad state. So we're going to have a little bit of that defensive bombardment. I'm going to roll the die. I'm quite certain that based on the, let's see, town as a -2, that we don't have too much to worry about, but the Prussians will get their die roll. So we're going to roll. They rolled a 1, so they get a +2 and then a -2. The +2 for being adjacent, or firing at 1 hex range, but then -2 for the town, and with 4 bombardment strength, a 1 is a 0 result. So they fired, nothing good there. And again, defensive bombardment is only for adjacent hexes, so nothing else is going to occur. So now we're going to have combats. The combat down here, there's potentially going to be sort of an anti-shock situation here, but it's going to be 5-3, which is going to be 1-to-1 odds. The morale is going to be equal. And then I'm not sure, these guys do have some shock. Whether or not they're going to get it, I might need to double check the rules, because you need a fair amount for it to actually take effect. So that is a yeah, I don't think that's going to be enough. He basically has 1 shock point, but you would need a lot more to actually get the benefit, I think. So yeah, I think this is just a straight up die roll, if I'm not mistaken, on the 1-to-1 chart. I had to double check if there were any other modifiers, and there really is not. The cavalry shock is not enough, and everything else, as far as I can tell, just does not matter. So this is kind of a tough die roll for the coalition, but they could manage to get into a position where they're outflanking the Prussians heavily. And they rolled a 2, which is a 1 step and a retreat. So this guy's lost. That's the first unit off the board for the Austrians, and they're going to have to beat a retreat. Well, or maybe not a retreat. Not affected by our result, so he's fine. There doesn't have to be a combat here if the Austrians don't want it, because they're technically not fully engaged yet. And I will say that they're going to sit tight in the town and just have that keep some Prussians busy. Whereas over here, we are going to have some more combat. So here's a 3-step unit. There's another 3-step unit. It's just going to have to be a 4-to-5, which is 1-to-2. And here there is a shock bonus for the Austrians, because they have 2 shock and there's 2 units involved in the combat. So we're going to have a +1 die roll modifier. So +1 on a 1-to-2, which again is kind of dangerous, but the key is to try to crack the Prussian cavalry line here. And they rolled a 1. Jeez Louise. So a 2 on... Oh, that's not good. 3 steps will actually be 2 steps and a route. So 1, 2, And I'm going to have to find his replacement unit, but and then these guys are routed. Go 1, 2, 3, and these guys are going to have to do a quick morale check. But that's kind of a bummer. That's not what we wanted to have happen, unfortunately. So, not good. Not good at all, actually. Yeah, let me double check to see how these morale checks are going to go. Okay, so one of these guys here failed a morale check, but this one was fine. So far, not how the Austrians wanted things to go, but they're going to be set up here with some engagement markers, which I'll have to grab from the baggie. But basically, there's going to be engagement here, and then engagement here, which is going to lock some units down. But here was where we'll maybe see the weight of the Austrian advance start to take shape as they try to push their way through the cavalry. Because the cavalry can only hold for so long before they get chewed up, I think. So they're going to get maybe pushed out of the way or forced to retreat or fight and get chewed up. What I'm going to do here, because I think this video is going to end up being too long, I'm just going to start playing through a little bit more, and I'll do check-ins along the way so you guys can see what else is going on. I don't need these anymore. And we'll go from there. Yeah. Well, guys, we've had a pretty gnarly set of events occur here where the coalition army has demoralized. And I think so as I'm learning the system and I'm learning the very bad things, for sure, one-to-one combats with any sort of negative modifiers are really, really not good. Really not good. And so, so as these guys met across the river line, the Austrians just had trouble. I rolled poorly, and the negative modifiers didn't help to where they started to get beaten back. Here, we had engaged the Prussian cavalry, and I think attritionally the coalition would have won out, except we lost enough points and we had enough minor routing units going on that when we adjusted morale, there was a 1. Basically, I had to roll a 1 for the Austrians to demoralize, and they did. I rolled a 1. So the coalition demoralized, and then a bunch more units became disordered and retreating, which all I can say is I thought it would go differently. So it's turn 5. There's still 5 turn, or we're at the beginning of turn 5. All it took was a turn or two of combat, and things have just gone awfully. A couple hours have gone by, and it just didn't go well, which is sad, I think, because the coalition was actually set up to probably really start putting the hurt on the Prussian position. But the fact that the Prussians do have good morale, they're probably going to win the day here, and because they've managed to do so well, you can see the counters stacking up. Their morale hasn't really dropped very much, whereas and this is a large part due to routing units. The morale for the Austrians is not very good. And now that they're demoralized, things are going to get even worse for them. Now there is a question of like, do the Prussians actually pursue? And I guess that's kind of an interesting question. What's really amusing is that the artillery managed to not rout or disorder, which was really funny. But now they're by themselves, which could lead to Prussians capturing them, which would be a lot of victory points. So I will say that this is probably going to be something of a Prussian victory, but I don't know the exact layout of how this is going to go, other than the coalition is in kind of deep trouble. Let me continue on playing for the noon 30, 12:30 time turn with the Prussians going next. Here's the French-Austrian army completely routed. Like nearly everybody is routed. There's some artillery left about to be captured. That's disordered, but this is pretty much, I mean, and this is in part because the coalition army has broken, which caused even more routing, and I mean, it's just gnarly. So I think I'm going to be able to call it as a decisive Prussian victory. I don't think I need to play anymore. I mean, I was about to start turn 6, but I think this just went badly for the coalition. There's no other way to explain it. Um, what I should have done in hindsight, and I'm not gonna, I could replay it, but I think I've got some lessons learned. Um, the Prussians were in a fortified position here with the river, um, and even the hill, and you can't afford like when I think about how bloody engaged combat is, because once you're engaged, it is tough to get away. You can't disengage very easily. So once the bloodletting goes, if you're lined up against a unit that has better morale and you're not making up for those bonuses any other way, it's just going to be an attritional battle that is against you if you have lower morale. And just down here, even one brigade chewed up enough of the Austrian units. They just couldn't make much of it. Um, so yeah, bummer. Had maybe the Austrians, I guess, what could we have done better? I think the coalition could have avoided trying to deal with this. They could have just held the line and maybe waited for the cavalry to get chewed up. But then that would have given the Prussians more leave to kind of create another, uh, not quite an encirclement, but to create that salient that would be maybe bad news for the Austrians. Maybe because we had activated right away, we'd have been better off going south, and maybe have done better than historical, um, because at least we'd be fighting in what is going to be much clearer terrain. Now, I'm sure that's what historically, the coalition might have been thinking, but we wouldn't have been caught in column formation, right? We would have been probably in a better terrain situation, and just yeah, the Prussians won due to terrain. I think that's kind of the key thing. They were able to make use of the terrain better, and my die roll model, like the die rolls that really mattered, I flubbed. Had maybe I rolled a 6 where I had rolled a 2 or a 1 on some of the combats of the coalition early on, might have made the difference where we could have forced the Prussians out of position, and then would have maybe been rolling up their flank or something, but we just didn't get it. So that I think what's interesting is, and this feels historical and appropriate, like, okay, once you're engaged, it's hard to disengage, and maybe I should have done a better job of trying to disengage, but I don't think. I think had I tried to disengage or swapped out units that were engaged, that -2 malice would have made it even worse. So I don't think I could have done much better there. But it really is like once you're engaged, if you're not advantaged on die roll modifiers, that timer's ticking because that force is going to get thrown back eventually. Um, and even with support units, it doesn't take long before those guys get worn out too, because there's only so many units on the board that have decent morale. So if we had the top engaged coalition unit get disordered and retreat a hex, and then the unit that was going to have to keep fighting in its place, I mean, often we would see a drop from like the original unit having a morale of 6, the support unit has a morale of 4 or 3, and he just gets chewed up almost immediately. So the coalition forces, the Austrian and the French, just don't have a lot of good morale units. And I think that, I mean, all of this is true to the situation and the analysis that the designer put in his Rossbach article online. So none of this was like that much of a surprise, but I think I just, even a -1 in a combat is a huge bad thing, especially if you're only rolling on the 1-to-1 table. So I really needed to figure out a way to get some multi-hex combats more down here that would have helped. Up here, I was starting to do that. And again, had I avoided so much bloodshed further south, I think I would have eventually worn out the French cavalry and compromised the entire Prussian position, but it just didn't happen that way. Um, so there you go, guys. That's sort of the main campaign of Rossbach, played a little bit differently. In this case, it was a similar result strategically, operationally, with the coalition army being completely routed. The Prussians could run up the scoreboard at this point. I don't think, basically all they need to do is send their cavalry down and just start capturing units for huge amounts of victory points. But we know it's going to be a huge score, and I don't think we need to play through it. I did get to use artillery a little bit more this time, which was interesting, and it definitely helps to have your artillery in place to do additional step losses and force the enemy back. Terrain is definitely a factor here, more than I thought it might. Um, and again, I think just the Prussians being in a good position, defensively, kind of have being prepared for the Austrian advance to some degree, and then their morale. I mean, the Prussian morale of 7 on some units is crazy. Um, it's just crazy, and so the one thing I'll say you're going to have to watch out for if you're playing this game, when it comes to comparing morale for die roll modifiers, it's easy to screw this up. I played it correctly here. I think for the most part, I might have made a mistake once or twice. If it's infantry involved in the combat and you have a higher morale, the die roll modifier is just a 1. If the all the attackers are cavalry and you have a higher morale number, then it's the difference. So again, like if it's a, I'm gonna have to find a good example somewhere, but just for lack of a better example, like here, the die roll modifier between these two units would be, for morale purposes, would be a +1. If I was attacking instead with, let's just grab some, again, ignoring terrain for a second. If I was attacking with cavalry against these guys, the morale differential would be, let's say I'm using this guy as our lead unit, would be 7 to 3 would be a 4. So a +4. I think there's a limit on how high that bonus can get. I have to double check. But once you start talking about even a +2, +3 die roll modifier after all said and done, that's pretty impactful. And so as long as the Prussians were able to maintain having those just extra couple of bonus points, there was some shock combat or cavalry shock bonuses they were able to get. It can, die roll modifiers are definitely feeling like king here, where that if you're attacking at low odds and you have a negative, good luck. And I don't think attrition, trying to win attritionally is gonna work, because what's gonna happen is if you attrit too much and your guys start to rout, that's going to give your opponent the combat successes that are going to offset other losses, which is what the Prussians were able to get. And then if you've already been taking losses already and your morale is dropping, and all of a sudden you've got a lot more routed units, then you're going to increase the chance of demoralization. And once that happens, you're in deep trouble. So you can't. I think my strategy of attrition could have worked up here if we got a little bit more time, but I bled too much down here, and it was too much. Granted, it was highly unlikely I was going to roll demoralization when I did for the coalition, but I did. I rolled the 1, and that spelled the doom for everybody. Mostly because even most of the coalition troops were within 3 hexes of a Prussian unit, which requires those morale checks on demoralization. So it was just like everybody started having problems at once, becoming disordered, some folks becoming routed. And once that really starts to go, it's rough. It's definitely rough. So, okay, guys, that's going to be it for this one, for this battle of Prussia's Glory, the campaign of Rossbach. We did the battle and the sort of full scenario campaign, whatever, however you want to call it. Ultimately, both scenarios lasted around the same number of turns, 4 and 5. It's just playing the main campaign allowed us to play it, to play with the overall operational area around these towns a little bit differently. So a slightly different scenario of battle came about, but one that ultimately was still a victory for Prussia. Again, given the situation, the terrain, maybe not that surprising, but I could have played better as the coalition, I think, for sure. As I play the system, I get a better feeling of, ooh, that's a bad idea. And now I've learned I thought maybe I could force the issue around here, but it just didn't go our way. And trying to fight out of this town turned out to be a very poor choice. So I should not have even have tried to hold that town, because once you're in there and you start becoming engaged, it's just it gets hectic. So. All right, guys. Well, that's it for this one. We'll see what other battles I may want to try with this system here soon. I need to punch and round the counters for other battles, but at least for this one, this gives you a taste of the system. Hope it's interesting, and I'm having a good time with it. It's definitely, it's trying to learn the system, understand it, play well is one thing, and there's some interesting puzzles to figure out on how do I want the engagement to go once the units are lined up for the engagement. So there you go, guys. Thanks for watching. Take care. Keep gaming. We'll see you in the next one.